All right, so throughout the course of the semester, we have really been focusing on the family court system, and essentially a lot of what we have been looking at is children or the youth as being really kind of the victims in many of the situations that we have looked at, from child abuse, domestic violence, dealing with parents separating, going through parental custody evaluations, being an eyewitness, and usually when they were a victim to a crime. But now in this lecture, we are going to focus on juveniles as the offenders. So we're going to look at juvenile delinquency. We will explore the history of the juvenile justice system, and we will look at the risk factors that are associated with youth who engage in criminal behavior and violent behavior. And then we will talk about how the justice system handles these individuals. First, I'm going to show you this video, which is an overview of the juvenile justice system, as well as looking at, you will see throughout the video, the different risk factors that have been associated with juveniles who have criminal histories. And you will also learn about how the justice system responds to juveniles. And also, in watching this video, please think about the consequences that juveniles experience when they have to go through this long, lengthy process of dealing with their criminal offense. So take a look.
On any given night in America, nearly 50,000 youth under the age of 18 are confined in facilities away from home, two-thirds of which are in correctional-style facilities. According to the nonprofit Prison Policy Initiative, this number has decreased over the last 20 years. But the United States still incarcerates the most children in the world. Sarah Hinger is a senior staff attorney with the ACLU's Racial Justice Program.
The United States far outpaces other countries in detaining and otherwise criminalizing young people. And that has, again, similar to the adult system, a disparate impact on youth of color who are disproportionately represented in contact with the criminal justice system.
But why is that? And why are so many youths arrested in the first place? Michael Corriero is a former New York State Supreme Court justice.
At the turn of the 19th century, we created the world's first juvenile justice system. The idea behind that was that as a society, we had a moral obligation to recognize the developmental differences of children as compared to adults.
But the idea of rehabilitation through the prison system isn't working. In 2012, the Department of Justice began tracking formerly incarcerated people of all ages. The latest report, released in July, found that of individuals arrested at age 17 or younger, 71% had been rearrested within 3 years of their release. That number climbed to 80% by year 5. The impact on an adolescent's access to education is part of the issue. In 2015, the Council of State Governments found 1 in 3 incarcerated youth were either receiving or needed special education services. The report also found more than half of incarcerated youth were behind grade level in reading and math, and around 60% had repeated a grade. The educational obstacles after prison begin before the first arrest, says Hinger, when school disciplinarians initially put a child in contact with the justice system.
The school-to-prison pipeline refers to the process whereby school systems address young people through discipline and criminalization, and effectively place them on a pipeline to continuing and more extensive contact with the justice system.
And that can cause long-term harm.
It ends up undermining any sort of positive modeling or reinforcement. It further removes the child's attachment to school, alienating them and pushing them forward towards more negative influences.
And even if an adolescent is innocent when arrested, the length of time required to post bail could lead to a suspension or expulsion from school.
So if a young person came into the system and bail was set and they were unable to make bail for 2 weeks or so, or someone was willing to put up the bail, that young person's education would be disrupted to the extent that very often they were not permitted back into the very schools that they were attending while they were arrested.
Children do attend school while incarcerated, and according to a 2013 Justice Department report, inmates of any age who participate in correctional education programs have 43% lower odds of returning to prison than those who do not. But the negative effects of traveling through the justice system and falling behind in school can follow youth well beyond their release. Formerly incarcerated people are twice as likely not to have a high school diploma. Their unemployment rate? 27%. According to the Prison Policy Initiative, when children are pushed away from education and into the justice system, it leaves them unable to compete in a job market that needs skilled workers. This is especially true if the individual did not receive youthful offender status. That status, Corriero says, means they could
come out of this experience without a permanent criminal record, which is so crucial and important for young people in terms of their capacity to eventually enter into the adult world, if you will, with a clear slate in terms of opportunity.
This is what drove Judge Corriero and his colleagues to set up and preside over the Manhattan Youth Park, a court exclusively designed to deal with the cases of kids between 13 and 15 and their co-defendants, to channel youth cases to alternatives to incarceration programs.
Those who sat in that part were expected to understand the vicissitudes of adolescence, were expected to develop an interactive relationship, if you will, with the young people that appeared before. And what we tried to do was to develop a process that helped us to channel out of the system those children that we thought we could work with by linking them to alternative to incarceration programs.
The youth part eventually became a model for mobilizing social services for young people under a judge's watch, because, Corriero says,
the dominant policy behind prosecuting children should be that of rehabilitation and not a punitive one.
Young people are going through a period of cognitive development, which means not only are they likely to change and mature out of any challenging or problematic behavior, but also that as a product of where they are in life, their reasoning and decision-making skills are different, and they need different things. Youth are just not primed to respond as well to punitive consequences and punishments or negative incentives.
Instead, Hinger argues the key is to hold youth responsible for their behavior outside of the prison system if possible, to stop the negative impacts on education and recidivism before they start.
When effective interventions are made, there are dramatic reductions in negative consequences and problem behaviors.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Tim McPhillips.
All right, so this was a good overview video because it's really it sets the stage for a bunch of different topics that we're going to talk about throughout this lecture. And the first thing I want to start off by saying is that the juvenile justice system is different than the adult criminal justice system. And at its very basic, there's two different names. It's the juvenile justice system, and then there's the adults which are handled in the criminal justice system. And as you will learn, the juvenile justice system is really intended to be a rehabilitative model as opposed to the adult criminal justice system, which is at its base is founded in a punishment model, although you can argue that there's been some changes in that regard too. But nevertheless, juveniles are really different. And they are different, and we'll learn how they're different, but the juvenile justice system is particularly different. And what you see on the screen right here is an example of that. So there are this is essentially the process of a juvenile moving through the justice system, and it looks incredibly confusing. There's arrows going in every which way. And that's because the important component here to know is that when juveniles do get involved, do get apprehended by law enforcement, there's several different ways in which their case can be handled. And at the foundation to all of this is this idea that we're trying to divert the juvenile away from any sort of having to deal with justice involvement. So throughout many steps of the process of even first kind of getting caught for a crime, there's many ways that our system formally and informally tries to intervene, because we are trying to keep the kid out of being adjudicated, having to go to trial, or having to go to a detention center or any sort of out-of-home placement. Every state is different as to how it handles their juvenile processes. But there are also some federal laws which do apply to all of the states, and we'll talk about that later. But essentially, it's important to understand, again, that there's many ways that we try to intervene with the kid to really focus on rehabilitation. Now, you will see at the top of this slide, there's several arrows pointing up to the criminal justice system, because there are situations in which a juvenile can be what we're called direct transfer or direct file to the adult criminal justice system. So there are instances in which you'll learn about in a little bit where juveniles are heard in criminal court, but we try to save those to very limited situations. So overall, again, the role of DJJ as it stands today is to serve as a rehabilitative model. In lieu of prison, juvenile court judges draw from a range of legal options to meet both the safety needs of the public, but also the treatment needs of the youth. Although youth might be confined to a juvenile correctional facility that, quite honestly, do often resemble that of adult prisons and jails, nevertheless, there are mechanisms in place in these juvenile facilities that are inherently different than the adult prison or jail system. Youth are entitled to receive educational programming while they are incarcerated. There are more opportunities for therapeutic programming. And also there's opportunities, like we've discussed, for receiving therapeutic placements outside in the community. What you are going to learn, however, is that the history, just kind of like everything in our history, it's a pendulum. So things tend to go back and forth with their views and our laws and things like that. Even if you look at just the last 10 years of our presidency, there's been swings back and forth, depending on who is in office. And so the same is true when you look at how the juvenile justice system has evolved over hundreds of years. I am going to let this video explain to you the history of how our country has dealt with juvenile justice processes.
America's criminal justice system has never treated all citizens equally. To understand how we got here, we need to take a look at the evolution of the juvenile justice system. Back before the American Revolution, the colonies followed the common law of England when it came to criminal justice. This means that children were held accountable as adults. In 1646, Puritans in Massachusetts enacted a statute called the Stubborn Child Law. This made child disobedience a capital offense, allowing a death penalty option. But then things started to change. In the 19th century, the idea emerged that children should be taken care of by the state. This notion ultimately empowered the state to serve as a guardian. In 1825, the New York House of Refuge opened for juveniles only. They were called delinquents to distinguish them from criminals. Reformers stressed that delinquents could be reformed, and if properly supported, they wouldn't turn into lifelong criminals. In 1899, Chicago reformers, also known as child savers, many of them disenfranchised women, decided to fight for the defenseless. One reformer, Lucy Flower, had been an orphan herself. The child savers pushed for the creation of the first ever juvenile court. This wasn't like a regular court. There was no jury. The judge didn't look down from a bench, but sat at a desk. Julian Mack, one of the first such judges, said a kid should be made to feel that he is the object of its care and solicitude. This court was the first of its kind anywhere in the world. Kids didn't get prison time, but instead were put in institutions or programs. Like parents, the court tried to steer kids toward becoming responsible adults. Within 25 years, most states started to think the same thing. Juvenile courts popped up everywhere, even in other countries. But for children of color, things were different. They were sometimes banned from houses of refuge or juvenile detention centers, and when convicted, they were more likely to be placed in adult prisons. Under Jim Crow laws, some cities like Memphis established separate juvenile courts for kids of color. A police officer, not a judge, presided over this court. After World War II, Americans seemed to relish the concepts of liberty and justice. The civil rights movement was well underway. Activists began to realize that while juvenile courts were designed to be less punitive, they didn't provide the constitutional rights enjoyed by adults. In 1967, for instance, 15-year-old Gerald Galt was accused of making an indecent phone call to a neighbor. Gerald was arrested without anyone informing his parents. No record was made of his appearance before a judge or the neighbor who complained. Gerald was committed to a state school until he was 21. An adult with the same charge might have received a $50 fine and 2 months incarceration. Gerald's parents brought his case to the Supreme Court. In 1967, that august body ruled that juveniles were entitled to due process. Then in the 70s, America started rethinking its criminal justice system. Crime had spiked, including juvenile crime. And in 1978, New York City passed the Juvenile Offender Act, a law that made it possible to try kids as young as 13 in adult court for murder charges and as young as 14 for other violent crimes like assault and robbery. That law caused states across the country to reinterpret who could enter the prison system as an adult. They were afraid that a new breed of super predators would sweep over the nation. Today, America incarcerates more juveniles than any country in the world. Every day, 53,000 children are locked up. That's more than a sold-out crowd at a Major League Baseball game. Nearly 60% of these children are Black or Latinx. Today, certain rights like the Sixth Amendment and the right to a speedy trial or a trial by jury remains only applicable to adults. Advocates have succeeded in getting almost all states to raise the age at which you are considered an adult to 18. But if you commit certain severe crimes, you can still be tried as an adult in the adult court and serve adult time.
All right, so the next few slides are really meant to just be provided so you all have the notes from the video that just took place on the history of juvenile justice. I'm not going to go into great depth as I think that video was a good overview. But just in general, keep in mind that, and so if we think about the pendulum, so way back in the 1700s, we had this idea that we knew that children under 7 years old, they just did not have the cognitive wherewithal to understand right from wrong. And so they were treated as children. They couldn't be charged and convicted like adults. However, there was this hard line that if you were over the age of 14, you were treated like an adult. It was assumed that you had the capability to know right from wrong of your actions. But what do we do about between the 7 to 14-year-olds? That was really a gray area where the prosecution had to prove that the youth did know right from wrong in order to process them that way. And then as we move through the 1800s, we realized that, no, you know what, youth really, they are different than their adult counterparts. They need to be treated differently. And right before the 1900s, we started to see the first development of having specialized court processes for juveniles. And that seems great and all. But the problem is that throughout the 1900s, early 1900s, we started developing these specialized courts for juveniles. At first, this court process was rather informal. It was often nothing more than, honestly, like a conversation between the youth and the judge. The child, the defendant, didn't have any sort of legal representation. And this is actually a part of our due process rights that are now a part of the Constitution. But so the youth didn't have any sort of representative with knowledge of the law. Proceedings were conducted essentially behind these like closed doors. There was little public or any sort of community awareness or oversight about how the juvenile court operated or what happened to the child when they appeared before the court, before the judge. And as time went on, there started to be concerns about this like leniency, but also what's really happening, what's really going on, how are they apprehending, how are they sentencing, how are they dealing with these kids. So they're starting to be really concerned about the youth's like their civil liberties. So what also, it was kind of like this biased perspective. It was this idea that, well, if the judge is deciding that the juvenile really does need to be confined, then they must need to be confined, but it's okay because they will be rehabilitated in that confinement. But it just kind of became a free-for-all. And so this lack of uniformity paired with the lack of any sort of due process rights, and then really kind of concern about when a judge decided to be lenient versus when they decided to be harsh, such as being biased towards a particular group of individuals, what have you, then we really started to hone in. And that's when you start seeing the pendulums start swinging to the other side. So there started to be case law and Supreme cases on appeal and Supreme Court cases that really stressed the need to have more definitive terms for juveniles, including that of due process. And then in the 80s and 90s, when crime really spiked as well as juveniles committing crime, we went through the tough on crime approach, and we really started to see a lot of juveniles be treated the same way as adults. And that included juveniles receiving the death penalty, as well as receiving being sentenced for life without the opportunity for parole. So parole is a chance for you to get out of prison at some point in time and come back to society. We still have these sentencing options for adults, but in the early 2000s, there were several Supreme Court rulings that made it unconstitutional for both the death penalty as well as life without parole. Those sentencing options cannot be options for juveniles. Juveniles can get life sentences, but they must have the opportunity for parole. And here in Florida, as well as many states, juveniles who have a life sentence after 25 years, they are able to be evaluated and reviewed for potential release into the community. I have been involved in some of those cases. All right, so we already discussed this, and again, these next several slides are intended to just serve as note-taking for you all. But what I do want to highlight is that these notable cases that took place in the early 2000s and even up till about a couple of years ago, and still ongoing really, were based upon neuroscience literature. It was neuroscience, neuropsychology that conducted the research to inform the courts about why juveniles should not be, or why they are inherently different than adults, and so they shouldn't be treated the same way. And that's based upon juvenile brain development. So let's touch upon that. So what is important to understand here is that if you don't know, now you know, our brains are still developing up until about our early to mid 20s. And the area that's developing of our brain is that of our frontal lobes. That is the last part to develop. And you can see that reflected here in these brain scans. So you see as an individual gets older, the amount of the bluish and purple colors gets greater. And what that represents is the decrease of gray matter. So when we're younger, we have a bunch of gray matter, which is kind of the ends of neurons that are all clumped together, hanging off different cells, and they're disorganized and they're all over the place. But as we get older and our cognitive functioning gets more advanced, more streamlined, more organized, the gray matter gets pruned out, it decreases, and it's because our cognitive abilities are higher functioning. They're more like I said, they're more organized. It takes out all of the extra fluff. And that's what you see here in this imaging, that as we get older, the blue parts represent the decrease in gray matter. Hopefully by now you guys know what the frontal lobe entails or what it's responsible for, but the frontal lobes is kind of our CEO. It's the boss of us. It is our higher order cognitive abilities. It helps us problem solve. It helps us judge situations. It helps us think about, hey, I did that before, and when I did that, that was a really bad outcome, so I shouldn't do that again. It helps us recognize these long-term consequences. It helps us slow down, inhibit our impulses. It helps us better control our emotions so that we don't just fly off the handle at any little thing. Think about teenagers, they tend to do that a lot. It helps us be organized. It helps us plan, set goals, make mini goals and steps to reach our goals. Before our frontal lobes are fully developed, or we have other brain conditions that impact our frontal lobes, or otherwise influencing them in some way, like using drugs or alcohol. But when our frontal lobes aren't fully developed, what we see is being without the common sense. So if you think about teenagers, either when you were a teenager or if you have any brothers or sisters that are teenagers, it is incredibly hard to deal with them a lot of times. They tend to be selfish, only thinking about themselves. They tend to be very rigid. I want it my way and my way only. I'm the only one who knows. I know everything. I'm invincible, etc. They don't think things through. They don't think about long-term consequences. They act impulsively. They do stupid things. And the list goes on. So, and this is not always or not necessarily because your brother or sister or you as a teenager is a bad person. Honestly, it's how our brains work. They aren't fully developed. We aren't processing events and emotions as well as we will be when we're older. Most of us will be when we're older. And it's for that reason that influence our legal system. So let me just touch on the emotion center of this too. So I talked about emotion regulation. It is implicated by the frontal lobes, but also more internally in our brain is the limbic system, which talks back and forth to the frontal lobes. Again, teenagers have trouble processing their emotions, and young adults as well. They tend to misperceive, misinterpret other people's emotions. If you ever think like, oh my God, they're talking about me. What are they saying about me when they're not even talking about you at all? Tend to overreact quickly, are very vulnerable, very susceptible to peer influence because there's a high focus on caring what other people think about us and being accepted. As we get older, we start to care less about that, or we recognize who our true friends are and what the true meaning of friendship is. And we're vulnerable to negative emotional states. So the teenage brain development's like giving a teenager with a car, right? And actually, this is in part why, well, pretty much the only reason why insurance rates for teenage drivers and young adults is so high is because of this research. So while the research was great for juveniles in the juvenile justice system, it's not great for our car insurance. But again, the teenage brain is like, it's like a brand new car, like the R8 that was on the screen. It's a new body. It's got a lot of horsepower, a lot of energy. It has a sensitive gas pedal, so you just tap it and it overreacts. It becomes emotional. And it's got a brake system that doesn't work very well. For years, this goes on throughout childhood, teenage years, and like I said, into early adulthood. And again, tons of research that has shown this. Lawrence Steinberg is one of the prominent researchers in this area, and you can see from some of these graphs here that several of the factors that I've already discussed. So we see here that impulsivity is highest. Those preteen, teenage years, it declines with age. Sensation seeking, same thing, like looking for the fast life. Risk seeking peaks in middle adolescence. Future orientation, so focus on your goals in the future, delay immediate gratification for your long-term goals. Increases with age. With age, people become more resistant to peer influence, and older individuals are more willing to delay immediate gratification. I'm going to play a series of videos here. These are videos that I've kind of cut up, so that's why it's a little bit chunky here. But it's a real life research that has explored impulsivity and decision making based upon sticking people in MRI machines and looking at how their brain's functioning.
Eager to look inside your brain. Is one of you going to be able to show us your brain today?
I guess I will.
Okay, great. So let's take a look and put him in the scanner. That'll be great. This is Jordan's 10th time in his father's scanner. His sister Sasha has been scanned over 20 times. And together they've contributed to an unprecedented picture of how the makeup of a young brain changes as it matures. Can you show me how that changed in Jordan's brain over the years?
We can from
you've been scanning him for a long time now.
So
what age do these start at?
So this
Can you hold that for us?
It goes from ages 3 to 25, and it's actually combining people across different chunks.
So this
of
is
age.
not just Jordan,
right? But it's actually part of it. Our is actually in this one, and what we see in these colors is blue can be seen as maturation in the sense it's getting closer to the adult brain. And what I'm going to draw your attention to is this part of the brain right here.
Here?
Yeah, the last to turn blue.
Right.
And this is the part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex,
right,
and involved in impulse control, long-range planning, the hard stuff, integrating everything to make decisions.
That's the part that should come in first. The maturation of the adolescent brain involves the pruning away of its gray matter, the nerve cells themselves, and the growing of its white matter, which is the cabling that connects the nerve cells. The cables themselves get better as they become wrapped with insulation called myelin, enabling them to transmit information hundreds of times faster. It's this improved connectivity of fewer, more specialized nerve cells that makes a brain mature, with the crucial decision-making front of the brain the last to join in. eager to look inside your brain. Jimmy was with his old drug gang friends, of course, when he attempted to rob the convenience store. How much did their presence contribute to his decision to shoot? I'm about to make a life or death decision myself. Fortunately, only a virtual one. I'm at Temple University in Philadelphia, playing the stoplight game.
I don't think so. It just saved my life.
We've all had the experience of trying to get someplace in a hurry, approaching an intersection, hitting a yellow light, and making a last-minute decision about whether we want to go through or not.
Right.
And that's what this does.
Oh, I would have made that for sure. I'm going to go through this. I made it again. Oh, no, okay. Oh, so I get this broken windshield. That's probably my head that made this dent.
A more typical participant in the stoplight game is a teenager playing like Alex here while lying in an MRI machine.
Yeah, he made it through the first one without getting killed. He seems kind of lucky with these. I would have stopped.
Alex is deciding whether to put speed ahead of safety while he's alone in the scanner. But that, as far as Alex believes, is about to change.
Hey Alex, how you doing? Good. I have your friends here, and they're gonna be watching you play the next round of tasks, so they're gonna talk to you a little bit, okay?
Okay, cool.
All right, you can just press that button.
Hey Alex, you still alive in there?
Oh yeah.
Nice.
Go ahead.
Hey Alex, it's Paul. How's it going?
Pretty good. How you doing?
I'm good, man. Good luck in there. We're gonna be watching you.
They're gonna be watching me.
Actually, they won't. But Alex doesn't know that. As far as he's concerned, his friends are watching his every choice.
Crash. Bang.
Is it my imagination, or is he having a few more crashes this time?
No, he is having more crashes, and that's what we find, that when adolescents play this game, they crash more often when they know their friends are watching them than they do when they're by themselves.
What happens with adults when they're with friends or alone? Is there that much difference with adults?
There's no difference at all
Really?
in how they behave or in their patterns of brain activity. So when adults are alone and adolescents are alone, they look very similar. It's when you put adolescents with their friends that their behavior and their brain pattern changes.
The brain pattern change is in the regions that respond to reward, principally in an area called the ventral striatum. When young people are alone playing the game, the ventral striatum remains quiet. But with friends around, it lights up.
During adolescence, peers are so important that their presence activates the brain's reward circuitry, and that makes adolescents, under that condition, pay more attention to the potential rewards of a risky choice and less attention to the potential downside.
Oh, bravo. You did a great job. Your friends are proud of you. Just don't get in the car with them.
I've always assumed teenagers drive dangerously because friends in the car actively distract them. But
Just thinking the friends are watching and observing them, not even passing judgment positively on their behavior.
It's something about the inherent rewarding value of people your age when you're an adolescent. And I think this has implications for understanding adolescent criminal behavior as well. Adolescents are much more likely than adults to commit crimes when they're in groups. And this research, I think, suggests that one of the reasons that happens is that this effect of peers on reward sensitivity may also play a role in adolescents' judgment and decision-making when they're in potentially criminal situations.
All right, so in conclusion, all of this research, like I said, was really foundational, really actually, I guess, groundbreaking would be the term to use, although it still surprises me that it wasn't until the early 2000s that we had this research and these findings. But nevertheless, this research has shown that juveniles are inherently different than adults, and therefore That is why they shouldn't be held to the same degree of criminal responsibility as their adult counterparts. Likewise, the data shows that delinquency peaks in adolescence and then tapers off into the 20s. So that is why crime rates are highest, or when you look at crime rates, they're highest amongst younger individuals, and as people get older, they age out. So people are far less likely to engage in criminal behavior as they approach 30 years old and on. Really about mid-20s and on. But aside from adolescent brain development, because that is kind of inherent across all adolescents and not all adolescents engage in delinquent behavior, what are the other risk factors that are associated with engaging in criminal behavior? And there are several things that we need to consider. We need to consider the individual as themselves, as a person, what risk factors they present with. And then we also need to consider their immediate support or circle, as well as their outside exosystem, outside circles. So some things to consider about the person, the youth, are things like their temperament and their resiliency. Are they an individual who just has an underlying predisposition to just kind of get snappy, to overreact? Are they a resilient individual, so they've faced a lot of hardships, but they're able to kind of bounce back, versus the one who is more likely to get down on themselves, get depressed, get anxious, get overwhelmed? Their level of self-esteem helps as a protective factor to serve against engaging in delinquent behavior. And of course, cognitive development, which we've talked about enough already. There are certain mental health conditions that are prominent amongst adolescents, and particularly those who engage in delinquent behavior. Individuals with ADHD have higher rates of delinquency, as do those who struggle with intellectual abilities. Substance use disorders, as you can see, is one of the highest, which that kind of makes sense. If you start using drugs, then you're more likely to be impulsive, you're not thinking clearly. It also may be that if you're using drugs, that you are also associated with other negative peer groups. Disruptive behavioral disorders such as oppositional defiant disorder and conduct disorder, inherently within their names and the diagnostic criteria is that you don't follow the rules. Mood disorders, so like major depressive disorder as well as anxiety disorders, are a risk factor for criminal behavior. And schizophrenia as well, or psychosis, but this is pretty low. Schizophrenia typically doesn't develop until early adulthood. So what kind of risk factors are posed by the family? Well, for one, people who are victims of abuse or neglect have higher rates of delinquency or exposure to domestic violence at home. Those whose parents don't utilize and teach effective communication skills, effective coping skills, like identifying our feelings, talking about our feelings, problem solving and talking things out rather than using violence or the silent treatment. Those are not helpful ways of managing and dealing with emotions and dealing with our problems. Lack of having any sort of structure or rules, so like anything goes, the parent who doesn't care or want to engage, or the parent who's absent as well. Antisocial parents, that being parents who are also engaging in criminal behavior themselves. Parental alcohol or drug use, and family size. So the larger the family, higher rates of delinquency. And I think that kind of goes down to all of the things that we talked about. Lack of structure, maybe less rules, maybe poor communication, chaos, perhaps economic struggles, things like that. And then outside your immediate environment, what other risk factors are there? Well, being involved with a peer group that is also getting into trouble, not having strong social support. So maybe your immediate parent or parents aren't available or they work all the time, but if you have extended family or you have teachers or a coach or a religious person or a mentor, a model, someone to look up to, someone that's there for you to help you, someone that you can rely on, you know, if you call them, they're going to pick up the phone. Youth who don't have any sort of commitment to school, that lack of commitment, that's kind of no structure, no direction in life, usually associated with a lower self-esteem. That is associated with delinquency. Being from a poor neighborhood, so economic disadvantage is associated with delinquency. There was actually an interesting study that just by increasing green spaces in juveniles, so in neighborhoods that were of lower SES, just increasing their green spaces. So having parks, having clean parks without needles, without graffiti, without garbage, just that alone was associated, well, I shouldn't say just that alone, but they were able to control for it to show that that really had a positive effect. And so along with that, limited opportunities and any sort of experience of discrimination, not feeling like one fits into their community or environment, being discriminated against, picked on, targeted, etc., is associated with higher rates of delinquency. All right, so taken together in consideration of all of this, we're going to move in now into a video that talks about restorative justice. So really focusing on how the juvenile justice system works with adolescents. So knowing that these are risk factors, some of which a juvenile can address and change, and some of which they are what they are, but we need to work around them. Knowing what you know now, how is the justice system targeting these risk factors so we can really work on rehabilitating the juvenile? So take a look.
Meet Alex. Right now, Alex is making a choice that will bring him in contact with the police or a school resource officer. We're going to learn about what happens after you are referred to a juvenile court diversion program. Mark is the youth program coordinator in the community Alex lives in. He receives the referral for Alex and calls Alex's parents to make an intake appointment. When Alex and his parents come in for the intake, Alex is given an SBIRT assessment to complete. SBIRT stands for Screening and Brief Intervention and Referral to Treatment. This tool helps Mark understand if there are significant substance use or mental health issues happening to Alex. Mark asks Alex and his parents a great deal of questions around the topics of family dynamics, mental health, substance use, school performance, interests, activities, free time interests, relationships, personal goals, and past history with the police. The victim has the opportunity to be involved and to fill out an impact statement. In this case, Jeff, the store owner, chooses to participate. Jeff indicates what sort of damages Alex's actions caused, and he makes recommendations for restitution. A summary of this conversation is shared with a panel of community volunteers who meet with Alex. The alleged facts about the case and the victim's impact statement are also read out aloud in this meeting. The volunteers then have a candid discussion with Alex and his parents to get a better understanding of the circumstances that led to his actions. They then develop a contract and explain what Alex has to do to succeed in the program and how long he has to do it. This contract usually has a number of steps which can include community service and is specifically tailored to repair harm. Over the next few weeks, Alex works on his contract and the volunteers monitor his progress. Finally, with the contract completed, Alex is called in for a final meeting. A goal of the intervention is to also build up the youth, especially if they've done reflection on what has transpired. If Alex had not completed his contract and met all his obligations, he could be referred back to the police for action through the court system. However, in this case, Alex has satisfied the volunteers who will close his case and sends out the paperwork to referral sources recommending that no further action is needed.
All right, so in that video, what you had heard about was the role of the youth and their family undergoing an assessment with the SBIRT. I'm not really familiar with what the SBIRT is, but what is important to understand is that juveniles undergo this assessment, which may be done by a psychologist. Usually they're done by like a social worker or a master's level individual. But right now we're going to focus on the role of the psychologist in juvenile justice, in the juvenile justice system overall, and in working with these adolescents and their families. The family part is a huge component that I think kind of gets minimized. But so there are various ways that a psychologist might get involved. And I'm not going to get into all these specifics about these different types of legal questions, but ultimately what's going on is a psychologist is coming in and doing an assessment of the juvenile. So it's really, the assessment is really understanding the juvenile, understanding their psychological background, understanding the risk factors, understanding their protective factors, understanding the influence of their family, the role their family serves, and intervening, figuring out ways that we can intervene with the youth with the ultimate goal of diverting them out of the justice system to rehabilitate them. So overall, we are trying to really minimize the youth's involvement with the justice system, reduce any sort of future involvement, so reduce criminal violent recidivism, get the youth connected, the youth and their family connected to any services that they need, and from an economical standpoint, this really, in the long run, reduces system costs, because if we can intervene now, then we can reduce all the costs associated with apprehending the juvenile in future delinquency matters, or even when they become an adult and it's even more problematic. There have been numerous studies that do support this kind of therapeutic intervention process. For one study, they showed that punitive treatment models don't have any significant reductions in reoffending behaviors compared to just kind of treatment as usual, which is whatever was available in the community at the time. It was really focusing on the empirical group in this study, that those that received the intervention, the therapeutic intervention diversion, that actually had positive outcomes. Another important component to our psychological assessment is the risk assessment piece, which I'm not going to delve into here, but if you take violence risk assessment with me, we get into that. But risk assessment is important because not all juveniles are the same. Not all juveniles who commit crime are the same. And therefore, we can't just give this same sort of diversion program to all youth. We have to really understand what is the basis. What's the etiology? Why are they engaging in criminal behavior? What are their risk factors? And with that, we have to understand what their risk level is. What is their level of risk of engaging in future criminal behavior and future violent behavior? The way we go about intervening with these youth has to be consistent with their level of risk. It's also important to understand that for adolescents, the severity of the behavior that they engaged in is not predictive of reoffending. Again, you really have to understand the adolescent as a person and what led to the crime to begin with. We know that most youth who are deemed to be low risk will never reoffend again. And problematically, if you mix these low risk offenders with high risk offenders, like putting them all together in a detention facility, you're actually increasing the likelihood that they'll engage in criminal behavior in the future had you not mixed them together. So based upon these risk assessments, we can really target our treatment to give kind of the lower less severe or less restrictive interventions to the lower risk adolescents. Like perhaps they might just be fine with doing some community service and they learn their lesson and they move on. But for the higher risk adolescents, we need to have more restrictive treatment, more significant interventions, such as maybe a residential treatment with a psychotropic medication, individual therapy, group skills building, and things like that. But we can't throw everyone all together. And there's research that shows actually in the adult populations that if you make a low-risk individual engage in all these restrictions and requirements that you would typically have for the high-risk people, they actually are more likely to recidivate, kind of like what I said with these youth earlier. So there's a variety of different ways that juvenile systems can implement diversion, or what diversion entails. And these are just some examples here, and then we're going to go into a couple of videos that show ways that it's been implemented. But typically what we see is requirements of the youth to engage in community service, required to pay restitution, so paying money back to whoever the victim was. And sometimes the victim's a person, sometimes the victim is like a store. If you stole from it, you have to pay back what you stole, plus maybe some other additional funding, etc. Skills training, so learning how to, could be a whole host of things for skills training. Criminalistic thinking patterns, so learning skills to reduce criminal thinking patterns. Learning skills to reduce anger, to have anger management. Social skills, so just learning how to engage with others, deal with your emotions. Recognizing how your behaviors have had consequences onto the victim, so building perspective, victim perspective taking, etc. There can be diversion where the youth is required to engage in mental health treatment, so individual therapy or getting medication, likewise for substance abuse treatment, and at times we may need to implement gang intervention. So this next video is going to discuss a diversion program. I think it originated in Queens, but has kind of been available throughout the boroughs. This video is dated, I think it was like 14 years old, but I came across it and I thought it was a really good example about, first of all, like just real life examples of teenagers. They present essentially their risk factors and understanding how this diversion program works and how it changed their life around. But again, it's 14 years old. I really don't know much about this program. I know it's still in existence. I hope it's an effective program. I checked out their website and they said all the right things on their website, but possibly any of you have had personal experience with this program. You yourself, a friend, maybe you volunteered there, or whatever the case may be. But nonetheless, the video does do a good depiction of what these diversion programs do look like in general in the community. So take a look.
My life was really boiling down to nothing. It slowly progressed from getting kicked out of school to being suspended, expelled, and then just hauling me off to jail.
I started drinking. My dad used to beat the crap out of me, and then he just stopped feeding me. And after that, I just went out to the streets. I was abusing drugs, was in and out of jail, and my life was out of control. I've been drinking since like 11 or 12. Then I went from drinking to doing marijuana, then to doing cocaine. But I guess when I actually became gang affiliated, I got more into it. I would be with them 24/7. I wouldn't go to school at all.
I was in a gang, and the gangs was just showing me that I could continue smoking and just keep coming out, going in and out of jail. And it was like a revolving door.
Every year, over 50,000 juveniles are arrested in New York. Alcohol and drug abuse is usually at the root of their problems. Some people argue that the best way to deal with juvenile offenders is to lock them up In New York City, it now costs over $200,000 to hold a juvenile in custody for just 1 year, and the price is escalating fast. Even more distressing, studies show that over 75% of all juveniles remanded to New York State custody were arrested again for a felony or misdemeanor crime, and 42% committed a violent felony. So what are the alternatives to juvenile incarceration? The following explores such an option. Welcome to the future of juvenile rehabilitation. Welcome to Outreach House.
My name is Ray Ortiz. I'm a former resident and graduate of Outreach House. Just like many kids in neighborhoods like this, I was a 14-year-old in trouble with no direction and no motivation. Thanks to Outreach House, I had an opportunity through the system to have a chance to change my life, get some values, and I didn't know I would have that chance until I walked through these doors.
Outreach House is really a unique program, and the model has continually evolved to involve families, to involve education, to involve aftercare, to involve the community. So we exist, and we're giving those kids a second chance on life rather than them being put upstate in some residential jail where essentially the state is going to spend lots of money and they're going to get no impact on turning these kids' lives around and giving them a value system where they're going to be able to go out in the world and become constructive citizens.
First, rehab to me sounded ridiculous. It was like, I don't need rehab, I'm okay.
The short-term goal with the kids is to get the kids off of substances. And the longer-term goal is generally to build communication within the family system.
They started helping me with my communication with my mom because I didn't talk to anybody from my family. My dad left us and that was the only person I was actually close to. So actually now I'm very, very, very close to my mom. My mother comes to see me. Yeah. I was surprised. She was never there. Like, I go to court by myself. I have to have one of my older friends come pick up my report card from school. Like, surprising for her to come to the parent support groups and stuff.
None of the family contact that goes on in this model could possibly go on in a juvenile model where the kids are 200 miles away upstate.
Before, he don't have patience. He don't talk with me. He don't share with me. Now, he's patient. Please, Mom, can we do this? He's so sad. I don't know how to explain it. No. I'm so happy.
The youngsters in this facility have a very long day. They wake up early in the morning. They have work responsibilities. They clean their facility. They help cook the food. They handle the communication. They do the laundry. They do all the things that a responsible young adult would do in a family system.
A lot of the kids are followers, not leaders. One of the things that they do learn here is that they do have leadership qualities. We just need to hone in so that they can become the people that they want to become.
I found that I'm really smart. I do love math, science, literature, and history. And I love to read. I'm a good speaker. And that's a beautiful thing to find because I found this all within here.
I came in here with a really low self-esteem. And I'm doing very good in school, really good. But some things will change, some won't. And I realized that I did. I changed a lot.
I've done better in school, got higher grades. I've gotten a better relationship with my family. And I have, everything about me I feel is just better.
If I was still outside, I wouldn't even have been going to school. I missed the last 3 years of school. So it's kind of like, it offered me a better education. After I finished getting my GED, hopefully I could go to college. I feel wonderful because I know this place has given me a lot of opportunities that I probably would have never had.
At Outreach House, the peer community is structured where kids entering the facility are expected to learn from kids who've been here longer. And the longer you're here, the more responsibility you have for self-management and the more responsibility you have for managing those below you. And it's the dynamic of that process and the structure of the facility that challenges kids to make responsible, healthy, organized decisions, which for many of them is the first time that's ever happened in their life.
What they learn here from the peers that they do get involved with is that I can be me and that I have something bigger to aspire to in life than using drugs and alcohol.
I really didn't have a clue what a goal was, but to just get high. And now I have real goals, going to school, having a new social network, and actually becoming somebody.
Well, Outreach House taught me to love myself, determination, perseverance. It gave me more strength. It gave me like a chance to start again.
I feel that everybody deserves a second chance. I went from somebody that was doing drugs, selling drugs, gangbanging, and made a complete U-turn and changed my life around.
Jail doesn't help you in any way. In here, it's like you come to Outreach, you work on yourself, you try to improve your behaviors, improve relationships. You don't just come out, you come out better.
Thanks to Outreach House, I finished high school, went to the Army, went back to college, and I even managed to start my own business. Outreach House gave me that opportunity to believe in myself, to see what I could give to society and become a better person at the same time.
I think that every child deserves a chance, and I think that every family deserves a chance to change. I just don't think that incarceration is an option. Although some of our kids have been incarcerated, and you know, when they talk to me about what they've gone through, I often think, you know, no child should have really had to go through that, particularly given some of the things that these kids have already been through on the street. I would love to see programs like this all over.
My wish for those who are taking a look at Outreach House is for you to celebrate the miracles of the kids in this facility turning their lives around. But my wish doesn't stop there. My wish is that you'll begin to create a vision where any kid, particularly kids from your community, would have a second chance on life at 13, 14, or 15 years old, as opposed to being consigned to a juvenile system where they're going to learn how to be a good criminal and are going to learn how to be part of a subculture. And we're going to waste money and waste lives.
All right, so again, as was mentioned early on, there are many ways that when juveniles are involved in the justice system that they may get diverted out. Most cases, I mean, this is for adults too, but most cases of juvenile delinquency end in some sort of like plea deal. So the juvenile pleads guilty to their offense or a lesser offense, saying that they did the crime, and they get probation. This happens in about 60, and then so when juveniles do plead guilty, in about 60% of those cases, they are given probation. And so probation usually includes basically the same stipulations or is a diversion program like community service and counseling hours. About 26% of adjudicated juvenile delinquents were placed outside of their home. So that means they were removed from their home. Well, I shouldn't say removed. That means that their sentence was to either do time in a detention facility or in a secured residential psychiatric treatment facility or substance abuse rehabilitation program, many of which are locked down. They can't leave. So it's kind of like a detention facility, but a stronger therapeutic purpose. But there are others who may actually be removed from their home. So that happens when the youth did involve in some sort of delinquent behavior, but maybe it comes to show that the youth's home setting is too unstable, it's not fit, there's abuse, there's neglect, whatever, or sometimes if the juvenile committed a crime against a family member, then they can be removed from the home. I actually had, one of my cases was a 9-year-old little boy, so not even a teenager, who sexually offended against his sister. So he was removed from the home. In general, research has shown that community-based placements do have better outcomes than detention-based placements. Placements that address the specific needs of the child and those that offer mental health and substance abuse treatment and also provide vocational opportunities, so really like honing in on your skills so you can be a productive individual out in the community, really have the best outcomes. No surprise there, right? And so another thing to point out too is that over the decades, juvenile justice reform has led to the development of specialty courts. So we have this in juveniles, we also have it in adult court these days too. But these courts aim to target the specific needs of the juvenile. Again, what led to the criminal behavior? Was it substance abuse, a mental health condition? What was going on? Traditional juvenile courts tend to have really heavy caseloads and judges who need to address a variety of issues. And so in these situations, the judges might not have the specific knowledge that they need, like if a kid really needs significant mental health intervention. So juveniles might be transferred to a specialty court if some of these specific needs are identified. But this isn't kind of like a standard thing across the country. It varies by state, it varies by county, and research is still developing an emergency as to whether or not these specialty courts for juveniles are actually effective at reducing criminal recidivism. Okay, so, and then we're going to conclude with one final video. This comes from Newark, New Jersey, about an innovative specialty court model that I find is very particularly interesting. And so after this video, that concludes this lecture.
Efforts to fix problems with the nation's criminal justice system, including taking a closer look at what to do about teenagers who commit minor crimes, our NewsHour Shares tonight looks at one program in Newark, New Jersey, which offers an alternative to jail for juveniles. From our student reporting labs at Phillips Academy Charter School, 12-year-old Yasmina Sharif reports.
All rise for the honorable judge. Welcome to the youth court. I am Jessica, and I'll be the judge in this matter. Before we begin,
if this looks like a real-life courtroom, that's because it is. At the Newark Youth Court in New Jersey, teenagers are the judge, jury, plaintiff, and defendants.
The high school students are really running the show.
Jasmine Harden is the program coordinator.
When students walk into youth court, you're seeing your peers, so you're seeing students that look just like you.
But this court is unique, offering a chance for introspection for young people who have committed minor first-time offenses like truancy, fighting, or vandalism. Youth court is an alternative to youth incarceration.
We're giving the student the opportunity to sit on the stand and talk to us about them. You know, are they remorseful about what happened? What would they do differently? And then the student leaves with some restorative sanctions. So this could be community service, a workshop, jury duty, a letter of apology, or an essay where it applies.
For a young adult who is accused of a minor offense, the police, a school official, or a judge in a preliminary hearing can refer the defendant to the youth court for trial. Here, a jury of their peers decides their punishment. Shantae was first referred to the youth court for harassing a classmate online.
I was actually getting bullied in school, and then I actually turned into the bully trying to react to the person, even though I knew it wasn't the right way, but it was no other way to defend myself.
For her sentence, she was assigned community service and a letter of apology to the student she bullied.
And the whole time I was at youth court, I never felt like anyone was against me. You actually feel safe in an environment where you can talk and communicate with people just like you.
Her positive experience led her to become a member of the youth court. Talithia Parker is a volunteer juror.
I just feel like when you walk in there, you're not expecting youth to be sitting there on a judge seat as the bailiff, as a youth advocate, or a community advocate. You're expecting adults to be there, so I just feel like they're more comfortable telling their story.
This model allows young people to resolve conflict outside the justice system, leaving them free of a criminal record.
Because he wanted to get me the remix, with all like.
Andrea McChristian is an associate counsel at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice.
So here in New Jersey, we have the worst black-white youth incarceration disparity rate in the entire nation.
McChristian authored a report that argued that youth incarceration in New Jersey is costly and ineffective.
We need to look at the racial disparities, look at how we can keep those kids from not getting system involved in the first place, and that's through diversion programs like youth court.
That certainly proved true for Shantae.
This experience has definitely changed me because it definitely showed me like there's another side to this world and that everybody is meant to be heard. Even if you don't feel like your opinion matters, everybody's opinions matter, and you just never know what you'll bring to the table if it's all up to you.
For the PBS NewsHour Student Reporting Labs, I'm Yasmina Sharif in Newark, New Jersey.